What do you guys think happened?
One of the players Robbie played with got carried away and killed him.
Well, that's kind of far out.
Mazes and Monsters is a far-out game. Swords, poison, spells, battles, maiming, killing.
Hey, it's all imagination.
Is it?
I was going to start this video with some joke about, like, rolling initiative to get the video going or something, but then I realized that's just incredibly stupid.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
Evangelical Christians. We're off to a really good start. Evangelical Christians really dislike a lot of things in popular culture. Harry Potter, Pokemon, the Purple Teletubby. They dislike these things for a lot of different reasons. A lot of which stem from the Satanic Panic in the 1980s, and a lot of which are just very silly. I remember hearing for the first time that some kids weren't allowed to read Harry Potter or play Pokemon in college, and it just blew my mind. Harry Potter because the spells used real Latin, and I think something about using the name witch. And Pokemon because, I'm gonna be honest, I still don't 100% get the Pokemon thing.
So Pokemon is a game that teaches children how to enter into the world of witchcraft, how to cast spells.
And the Purple Teletubby because he's gay. Obviously. But we're not here to talk about the moral panic surrounding any of those things. We're here to talk about one of the very first cultural targets of moral outrage. We're here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and why evangelicals hated, and in some cases still hate, it so diddly darn much. To understand why the Christians of the 1980s hated Dungeons and Dragons so much, we first need to understand D&D and its concepts. Also, I'm sorry, I'm taking the hat off. Dungeons and Dragons, commonly referred to as D&D, is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game first designed by certified shitlord Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. It was first published in 1974 and is now owned by Hasbro and on its 5th edition. The details of the rules are a bit too complicated and ever-changing to get into here, but this is the gist. Each game has 2 roles: the Dungeon Master and the players. Traditionally, there is one Dungeon Master who kind of runs the show and any number of players. The players create a character, give them a class, race, and moral alignment, i.e. chaotic good half-elf rogue, and play as that character as the Dungeon Master either comes up with obstacles and scenarios for the players to overcome or reads off of a pre-written script, while also acting as a sort of referee and deciding what players can and can't do within the realm of the rules. Usually, players tell the DM what they'd like their character to do. The DM gives them the go-ahead, and then the player rolls dice to determine if that action was successful or not. The game can be played using theater of the mind, i.e. use your imagination, silly, or using little figurines or digital maps like those found on Roll20. Whichever way you play, the game involves a lot of creativity and
imagination.
This is obviously an incredibly watered down version of the rules of the game that I just gave you. All the nerdy white men in my comments can stop typing now, I know. The game differed from a lot of other tabletop games that came before it in a couple key ways. The main one being that unlike something like, I don't know, Risk, you aren't playing using military formations. You're playing as an individual character whose backstory you create and whose moral leanings you decide, good, neutral, or evil. As you play, you're also usually weaving some sort of narrative. The fantasy element was also fairly new. introducing spells and magic as things that are commonplace in the world of the game. If you grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household, the red flags might already be popping off as to why evangelicals did not care for D&D. But before really getting into that, let's take a step back and talk about the Satanic Panic as a whole. The Satanic Panic was a period of moral panic in the 1980s that targeted alternative culture as a whole, claiming that it inevitably led to devil worship and satanic ritual abuse. The panic as we know it can be traced back to the release and publication of Michelle Remembers in 1980, a discredited book co-written in 1980 by psychiatrist Lawrence Pastor and his patient and eventual wife, gross, Michelle Smith. The book chronicles the supposed satanic abuse suffered by Michelle at the hands of cultists. The only problem was that the book provided zero proof aside from Michelle's recovered memories, uncovered after Michelle underwent the largely discredited recovered memory therapy. These days, for the most part, we know that this book was nothing more than a selection of sensationalist claims that were created just to sell copies. But at its release, it was a huge success. At least in popular culture, academics were suspicious from the get-go. In fact, it wasn't until an article was written by, I'm about to butcher this name, and I'm very sorry, by Kerr Kuhulain? I'm sorry. In 2002, that the public at large began to question the claims made in Michelle Remembers, questioning the so-called recovered memories, and thought, maybe there isn't a large, sophisticated cult of Satanists torturing innocents that's existed in the United States for generations, but somehow I'm just now hearing about. Now, this sounds kind of familiar. But that was 2002. Let's go back to the 80s. Michelle Remembers was released and was a huge success. The Manson trial was fresh in the minds of parents, and The Exorcist was a hit. People went wild with the devil stuff, especially evangelicals. In the era of stranger danger, it seemed there was a serial killer in every neighborhood just waiting.
You've taught your children to be polite and friendly. But have you taught them when not to be?
Hi there! Do you live around here?
People were scared. They attacked everything from certain kinds of music and aesthetics to anything involving magic at all, no matter how fantastical. These things that they believed would easily lead your child down the path to Satanism. These unsubstantiated claims were backed up by prominent church leaders like Jack Chick and converts like John Todd. The devil is hidden everywhere, they claimed. Our world is filled with satanic imagery and secret cults, like the Manson family. You must protect your children from anything that even so much hints at the occult, the unusual, the alternative. You must protect them from Dungeons and Dragons. Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourself unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:31. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Exodus 22:18. And he burned his son as an offering, and used fortune-telling and omens, and dealt with mediums and necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. 2 Kings 21:6. These are all Bible verses commonly used by fire and brimstone types when discussing magic. Now, of course, any sort of application of these verses to things like Harry Potter or D&D relies on the audience of these verses believing 1, in the Christian Bible, 2, believing in magic, and 3, believing in a literal translation of the Christian Bible. As we talked about in the previous section, 1980s America was ripe for this kind of dogma. A favorite piece of mine from this era is a chick tract titled Dark Dungeons, in which a young girl ends up being recruited by a satanic cult because they've observed her playing D&D and she's just so gosh darn good at casting spells. God, I wish. When confronted with the fact that the magic criticism of D&D is a bit silly, nerdy teens are not really casting Fireball no matter how much they wish they were. The argument made by William Schnobelen, a author for Chick Tracts and Chick Publications, was that at this point we're just rearranging lawn chairs in hell and being pedantic. Imaginary magic and spells are still magic and spells, which, I mean, is an argument, I guess. But magic was not the only thing that had evangelicals up in arms. There's also the moral alignment aspect of creating a D&D character. Each D&D player character is sorted into a moral alignment, as seen on the chart here. You can probably guess the bit that upset people, but it also gets more complicated than that. As Mr. Schnobelen says in his 2001 article, Should a Christian Play Dungeons and Dragons? This is clearly not a biblical moral compass. Obviously. As he points out, the D&D Player Handbook states that goodness has no absolute values. Although many things are commonly accepted as good, helping those in need, protecting the weak, different cultures impose their own interpretations on what is good and what is evil. This is a concept commonly referred to as moral relativism, and a lot of people, not just Christians, take issue with it. If we say everything is okay because every culture has different moral ideas, then where do we draw the line? Where does it stop? I have my own thoughts on moral relativism, but that's not what this video is really about. Again, what's being missed by our old friend William is that D&D is fiction. It's a game. The spells and actions being taken are just as real as the Hogwarts or the Purple Teletubby. No one playing D&D is under the impression that they're actually an elven sorcerer. And if they are, they probably have other issues that need to be addressed. Oh, my ears. Any link between D&D and real-world Satanists, aside from very few extreme outliers that fundies just love to throw out at you, are about as provable as the narrative outlined in Michelle Remembers. That is to say, not at all. So, it's 2021. Michelle Remembers has been entirely debunked. What was the result of all this? Well, D&D, Harry Potter, heavy metal, Pokemon, and the Purple Teletubby have largely moved out of the crosshairs of fundamental Christian ire. Largely moved out of the crosshairs. Those people are definitely still out there. But an argument could be made that the Satanic Panic is having a bit of a resurgence. I hinted at this earlier, but what is QAnon if not the belief that there's a generations-old cult who's threatening our children? That Lil Nas X is a secret agent sent by the devil to turn your kids gay. The effects of the Satanic Panic can still be felt everywhere. From Pizzagate to #SaveTheChildren. The world is chaos and people want someone, anyone, to blame. Whether it be an openly gay pop star or some nerds playing D&D. My ear is getting crinkled. See, that's why I can't wear the hat. That, unfortunately, is probably never going to change. At least as long as reactionaries get the final word. A lot of people like to pretend that the Satanic Panic is a thing of the past, that we're beyond such reactionist thinking in 2021. But it's abundantly clear, at least to me, that the panic is actually more alive than it's been in years. It just looks a little different. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's more intense than ever, with greater and greater consequences. Hey guys, I'm back. Thank you for being chill about my little hiatus I took for the last couple weeks. I hope you enjoyed the video. I personally am very happy with it. If you did enjoy the video, why not give it a like or a share? Or subscribe and see more? You can even support the channel by becoming a patron or buying some merch. Links to both of those things are in the link tree down in the description. If you didn't like the video, sorry you weren't allowed to play Pokemon as a kid. Bye! Again, what's being missed by our old pal William? Again, what's being missed by our old pal